email that I have listed, which is quite lengthy, so it's not as user-friendly as I'd like to see it, but it is for any questions, any licensing, invoicing, inquiries. You can direct any of those to that general email. And as Jeremy mentioned, we have MyEdWIS, also called EDI for short, which is our new database. And that has a website and a specific email for inquiries on just getting started in it, linking to it. And we have some videos out there as well that will assist you in using it, but hopefully that will be a great tool to have that you can then look up yourself, licensing information, pool information, things like that, all in one location. So with that, let's see, I am going to turn my camera off as I end up presenting, and Jeremy and Dave will monitor any questions as I go along. This should be real informal, so chime in if you have questions as I go, and I can answer them along the way or at the end as well. There we go. So this is just our area map. Dave and I have basically the entire state. So I'm in the tan area. Dave is in the green area for swimming pools. And this map is also available on our website, which it shows all contact information. Again, our general email for any information for licensing inquiries, and our program administrator, our secretary, and Jeremy's email, and Dave and my information as well.
Yeah, and Karen, I forgot to even mention, I'm gonna jump in right now. Sure. Sorry about that. Yeah, I also wanted to mention that we just had another engineer position posting close on Friday, so I'm just starting to get information on the applicants for that position. So we will have another engineer starting with us hopefully in a few weeks. You know, we've got to go through interviews and all the HR stuff here in the next few weeks, but hopefully this summer we will have another engineer joining the programs here soon.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to review the inspection report, go through each section kind of in detail. I might skim over some items, but if you have any questions as we go along, as I mentioned, just jump in. I'm going to break it apart and discuss each section. And so as this indicates, there could be multiple forms. So with that, we have the supplemental form as well. So that's used if you have many comments or if there are issues that you want deadlines that are different for each non-compliance item. You can use the additional supplemental form for those. In addition to our closing order, if it gets to a point where there are non-compliance items that are are either red flag items or continual chronic items that you feel escalates to a closure that is a health or public safety concern or water quality. So those would be the forms that you would be using. So inspection reports need to be completed for each pool each year. This is what triggers their operating permit or license to be issued the following year. So for example, this year's inspections in 2022 will then trigger the operating permit to be issued for 2023. So in these times with COVID, some pools had not been inspected. So if those pools are just opening after being closed for a few years, the inspection for this year in 2022 may double count. So they could then get their license issued for 2022, and it would then also count for next year's 2023 license. The report form has 2 columns, so you can use it for 2 pools. And I do know that some local health departments have their own forms, which they've compiled, which has the same information as what our form shows. It just may be a different order, excuse me, or a different format, but it contains basically the same information. But I'm going to break apart our form today, but it should be very similar to any health department's specific forms. So on the top, you'll see, and we hopefully will be updating these forms just with the new database. There's a new numbering sequence, but the old format was a 2-digit - 4-digit code, then 0102 in numerical sequence for the pools. The first 2 digits were the county code. So you would see 41 for Kent County, for example, and then a 4-digit followed by 0102. The new database has a different numbering system, so it's actually going to be SP with a 4-digit, and it still will use 0102. So the 01, 02, 03 designations remain the same. It's just going to be a different 4-digit numerical code. And we do have reports that we can send to each health department to cross-reference those numbers for you as well. But if you don't know the new number, we still have the legacy number in our database. You can use the old number at this point in time until we can get everything updated. Obviously, this first section is just basic information: pool establishment name, the street address in the city. If you can verify if the contact number has changed, that's important, especially with trying to update our database as well. So that's pretty straightforward. Inspection type, so that should be marked. Sometimes you'll go out on a complaint, or if you've already been out on a routine, you might be doing a follow-up. Sometimes if it's an outdoor pool, it's a seasonal opening. And as you can see, there are the 2 columns. So it would be, you know, the first column for 01 and the second for 02. So mark those accordingly. And again, for the type of pool, just mark for each accordingly. That's pretty straightforward. And make sure you place the inspection date. That's also very important. As I said, those trigger when the permit is issued, and it's good to know so that we can keep our records straight as far as if there's a follow-up and keeping the timelines in line. This section here is really important. Sometimes I do see these left blank, especially the flow rate. Sometimes on the flow rate, you may not have a working flow meter, so it just has a line through it or just left blank. If that's the case, the flow rate is very important, so hopefully they can either correct it if while you're on site, or if it's a matter of needing to replace the flow rate, maybe that's something they can follow up with you by a picture or just an email back to you. But that's one item that you should know for pools, of what their minimum flow rate should be. Because in another instance, I do see flow rates noted that are significantly lower than what the flow rate should be, and there's no note made of it, and it's an approved inspection. And if I do look at these occasionally, I wonder why that flow rate is so low. And even on the flip side, if the flow rate should be, say, for example, 75 gallons per minute and it's at 200, I'm wondering why that flow rate's really high. It's really a detriment to that facility. They're using more chlorine than they need to. So a lot of times as well, the piping may not be able to handle a higher flow rate. So it should be within reason. Anyways, these items should be marked. You know, pH should be between 7.2 and 8. If they are using bromine, there should be a minimum of 2 parts per million, 1 to 2 parts per million for chlorine. And if they do use a stabilizer, which is usually cyanuric acid, that should be less than 80 milligrams per liter. Let's see, temperature for spa should not be higher than 104 degrees. And for any swimming pool. That's just up to the facility as to what temperature that they would want to operate at. Some like them a little warmer, depending on the facility. So it's just noting it in that section. And they should be sampling for back T. This needs to be at least quarterly per the rules, but many health departments have an increased monitoring frequency. So whatever it is for your area, they should be assuring that they're taking those accordingly. Okay. So in the main part of the inspection form, this is what the key is for compliance, non-compliance, or if it doesn't apply, a check mark for compliance, X for non-compliance, and just a line or dash through that item if it doesn't apply to the pool. That's just typically what is used for marking these forms. And I'm not sure if all of you are aware of this color-coded annotated form. It's just something that we use as a guidance. It's not set in stone. It's just to help health departments kind of gauge where major issues lie, where issues that are not a problem to warrant a closure, or some that are in the middle. So, you know, the red, yellow, green, obviously green isn't as bad. Red would be something that you would warrant as being a major issue that would not allow that pool to operate at that time till it's corrected. So you can see here again, the greens are yes, red's no, yellow conditional. So with that as well, you know, it doesn't mean that what we note as a yellow item could never be escalated to a red no. If you see year after year after year, the same items marked and no compliance or no correction, that can escalate to a red. And that's as well as the green items. If they're just items that are being ignored and year after year you point them out and they don't get corrected, you can escalate that to a conditional or again to a no for operation, depending on the item. And we can consult with you on that as well. If you have questions, we don't always track the comments, only if it's a conditional or obviously a no, we will look at these, but normally there's so many inspections that we don't read all of them to determine if there's issues that are chronic year after year. So with your help, we could, you know, work with you and figure out if that facility needs to have something warranted as a conditional and get into compliance with some of the various items noted. In these forms, you'll see behind each item the brackets, and those refer to the swimming pool rule number. So if you have a question or want clarification as you're looking at some of these items, you can then reference that rule number pretty quickly. So it makes it actually kind of handy, pretty easy to look that up. So any questions at this time? No.
Karen,
I got one.
We just had one from Tricia in the chat regarding, you know, whether an inspector should submit another form to reflect a flow rate fix. Like at the when you were going over that top part at the bottom or of the form where maybe there wasn't an appropriate flow rate for that particular pool, if that was noted. And kind of what I put in the response was it kind of depends, you know, if it's something that maybe they corrected right on site while you were there, you could maybe note that on the current inspection report that you submit. If maybe you indicated that there was a conditional approval because of that flow rate, maybe there were some other issues with the pool and you were going to schedule a follow-up, then yeah, maybe it makes sense to address that flow rate with the follow-up inspection and include information on there, whether it was fixed, those type of things. Not sure if you had anything more to add to that.
No, I think that's correct. Like it would just vary. If it was something where you left and you were very concerned with that flow rate, then you could just, sometimes I see if it's just one item like that, it's just noted or dated that follow up via email flow rate is, corrected, or what the current flow rate is. You can just note it on that form and submit it as your follow-up. I've seen that happen too. So I did see in the chat there's asking for the color copy. We do have that. I don't know, Dave, if you have that handy, if you could throw that in the chat possibly. Otherwise, we can get that in the chat at the end.
Yeah, I do have it. I was trying to figure out how to attach it in here.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, I will continue on then. So with that, the first section is the pool enclosure and deck. So some of these I might lump together. I'll try to go through each one just briefly. And again, any questions, feel free just to jump in. So doors, gates, comply. We're looking for self-closing, latching, locking. Typical entrances should be to the shallow end. Depending on the layout, there are, even if the pool is considered shallow, I would say a shallow pool is a 4 or 5 feet even is considered you'll see an entrance sometimes in the middle of the pool, and large decks where the flow of traffic kind of leads you one way or the other, not directly to the pool. But typically we would see an entrance at the shallow end. If there's service gates, those usually are kept locked and closed all the time. But the biggest thing is the latching. I get a lot of questions on latching. Sometimes, for example, you'll have a YMCA that has just a swinging door that enters off the locker room. Those don't latch. Sometimes we'll have to take a look at those because maybe the outside hallway door has a latch or a lock, and we constitute that as their enclosure entrance. It just varies, but typically that's the 3 items we're looking for: self-closing, latching, locking capabilities. So pool enclosure complies. So if it's an outdoor pool, it has to have a 4-foot high non-climbable fence, 1 3/4 inch maximum mesh if it's a mesh fence. If it's slats, we look for 4-inch on center. In wade pools are usually, well, they are required to be enclosed separately. And if there's any other activity areas like a volleyball, fire pit area, those usually have to have some form of a barrier for separation, not necessarily a fence, but the rules indicate a barrier. So sometimes those could be planters, the built-in bench seating, anything like that, shrubbery, whatever that the facility wants to use to kind of separate that area. I'm just going to jump ahead here. So backing up to the enclosures, these are some of the outdoor gates. And I apologize, some of these pictures are a little grainy, but you'll see there could be a keypad punch, a plunger, or just a latching gate type bolt action like this. Again, here's some enclosure examples for outdoor pools. Here's the mesh fence at the top. Bottom right is your slats. You want to make sure that you can't get a foothold, so you don't want a center cross pole or beam or whatever you want to say, so that you could get a foothold to actually climb that. And then here on the bottom left is just a clear glass type, plexiglass type fence. Again, 4 feet high, non-climbable. The next section I guess before I jump into that, the number 3 item on the enclosure is deck clean and drains in good condition. You just want to make sure everything's just clean as you walk around. Is there dirt, debris? Does there look like there's algae growth or bacteria growth? So just making sure everything's clean and sanitary. Next sections on the form talk about showers, drinking fountains, and hose bibs. So you'll see various types of non-enclosed showers. Here's one that's just a tower shower. You'll many times see them off of the community building or bathroom building. That's typically where you see them, with just a shower head off of there. If you're looking at a YMCA or a school that actually has locker rooms with showers, and those are the main entrances onto the pool enclosure, those showers are contained in there, and they may not have a non-enclosed shower in the enclosure area. But those are typically the only facilities that I see that don't have the non-enclosed. Most will have one type or another of these non-enclosed shower heads. Drinking fountains, they are required. The rules require them, especially with COVID. We've had a lot of questions about removing drinking fountains or not allowing the use any longer. They are required. It's to make sure that people aren't, especially kids, drinking the pool water. So we do allow the location of those drinking fountains to not necessarily be in the enclosure. Sometimes you'll see a hotel pool that may have a bathroom and a drinking fountain just outside the entrance to the pool enclosure in a hallway. That's acceptable. We have had some requests for a variance to allow, for example, like this Culligan water cooler, something similar to that. We have allowed that. So if there's a reason for that and justification, we have entertained that as an option. And then a hose bib should just be provided in some location, whether it's in the equipment room, right off of the enclosure, or in close proximity to be able to clean the deck. That's the main function, just so that it can be maintained in a clean and sanitary condition. And these should actually have hose bib vacuum breakers on them. So that's just for backflow prevention, and the hose, if it has a sprayer on it, shouldn't be connected the entire time just because of that vacuum breaker. But there should be a hose bib somewhere along in the enclosure. The next few sections talk about markers, diving, platforms, steps. So the depth markers are required to be around the pool. They need to be 4 inches minimum in height. Basically, they're located on each side and end, and they show the maximum and minimum depths. If there's floor slope change, they have to be located there, but they should be no more than 25 feet apart around the deck of the pool. A lot of times you'll see them shown on the inside wall of the pool. Our rules don't speak to that. They don't require that. If they're there, that's great. It's just another location to be able to see the water depth, but our rules require them on the deck. And again, the no diving, if it's less than 5 feet, it should also have the no diving markers, except for a spa. A spa is not required to have the no diving, just because it's not a type of pool that you would have the ability to dive into, so it's not required for a spa. So diving, you'll see various types of diving boards. It could be 1 meter, half meter, depending. You're looking for, they've already been approved during construction. So during an inspection, what you're looking for would be anything that's loose, anything that's cracked, any issues with it that looks like it may be in disrepair. That's the only items you'd be looking at with the diving facilities. And then starting platforms, the same as well. Those are already approved, so the correct water depths should already have been reviewed, and you're looking for, again, anything that might be in disrepair, cracks, anything like that. Sometimes I get a lot of questions on starting platforms. The rules indicate that they need to be removable. A lot of times I don't see them removed. They've been either roped off when they're not in use or bags put over them. Most of these pools are lifeguarded with starting platforms, so there shouldn't be a problem if that happens, if they're roped off or bagged. Or just prohibited from use. It's just for the safety of the bathers, because it's very important for people who know how to use the platform and dive correctly so that there's no injury or accident. So if they literally aren't removed, if they're just prohibited somehow from being used when they're not used for competition, that is acceptable. And then the other item would be for steps. So the front edge of steps, have to be marked. And any benches, as you can see in the picture below, there's the front edge is marked in a darker marking, darker tile, and there's also a bench that goes along the wall. So that would be also marked. And kind of disregard, there should be a handrail on this picture, but I think it was just grabbed from probably more so a residential, but it's just showing the markings. So there should be no tiles missing, things like that. So those edges need to be marked in a contrasting color, and they should be easily visible. Okay. Anything on this section before I move along for questions?
Karen, there was one about variance requests for the drinking fountain, whether that should be submitted to us at EGLE or the health department.
I think the health department, if they're comfortable with the facility, a lot of times I like to rely on them and would support their opinion on it. So if they're comfortable with allowing, for example, just a water cooler in lieu of the drinking fountain, I would support that. It wouldn't necessarily need to run through our level. But if there's a question as to if you're unsure or if your department doesn't want to make that judgment call, then yes, it can just be through an email to Dave or myself inquiring or requesting the variance to that and reasoning why and location, and we would review at that time.
Yeah, Karen, I would definitely support that. What you said is a proper response. We want to have the health departments do as much as they possibly can and what they're comfortable with. So yeah, that's a good procedure there.
Okay.
We had another one just pop in too from Phyllis over at Wayne County. Is there grandfathering for no shower at the pool?
Well, back, I don't even know what year it was, there was a foot spray that was required, which is no longer required and converted into a poolside shower. I would imagine if that pool was approved at that time and had a foot spray, that it is acceptable until they do some modifications to their enclosure area, then that's when we would have them provide the non-enclosed shower. So if there is nothing there, I don't, honestly, if it's an old pool, we have some that are very, very old. I'm not really sure what was done in the past. I don't know if Dave or Jeremy have insight into those older pools, if there even were required to have even a foot spray at the time, I don't know. but we can look at those if you have questions or think that there should be a shower or something. We can determine if it's acceptable to require that.
Yeah, that's right. And we do have the historical sets of, the previous versions of the pool rules, so we can kind of go back in time and kind of see when a permit or a pool was constructed and kind of what the rule set was at that point in time. And as Karen pointed out, if there's modifications, typically we're, depending on the modification to that pool, we're going to try and get them up to the current set of rules. So we can certainly work with anybody on those type of situations, because a lot of times it's going to be a case by case. So
Yeah, I just kind of hate that term grandfathering. It just kind of can be a catch-all for a lot of things that people don't want to comply with. So, like Jeremy said, kind of a case by case, and we definitely would want to make sure that they would have some type of foot spray or shower, and not just say, oh, it's an old pool's grandfathered, and we don't have to deal with this at all.
Okay, I will move along. So the next section on the inspection report is pool water quality and pool structure. So I will kind of run through just each item, and then I'll forward into some pictures. So pool water clarity and quality. You can see that's highlighted in red. Obviously, we want to make sure that the pool water is clear. You can see main drains typically from 30 feet away is kind of the rule of thumb. You want to be able to see the entire bottom, determine if there's any sand or dirt on the bottom, and the pool quality complies. So obviously you'll need to have a test kit and make sure that it's tested and that it falls within the chlorine residual, the pH, all of that. So that's a huge one. That's basically the main reason you're there, is to make sure that it's clean and clear. And just as a side note, the kind of a rule of thumb about spas, and I don't think this happens hardly as frequently as it should, but they should be drained typically every 3 to 4 weeks and scrubbed and clean. There is like a formula that I've found that you take the spa volume, divide it by 3, divide that by the average users per day, and that kind of gives you a rule of thumb of the number of days between use to drain a spa. It's just that there's such a small volume, and they are actually very difficult to get the pool quality kind of balanced many times, but a lot of reasons too is just the high temperatures and just the bacteria growth and things like that. So it is recommended for spas to be drained more frequently and cleaned, but I know that doesn't happen as much, but if you run into a spa that has a lot of issues with trying to balance its water chemistry, that could be just one of the reasons, and maybe something to mention, that they want to maybe get on more of a schedule to clean and drain the spa. So pool sides and bottom clean, pool structure in good condition. Again, that's just general observation, looking for sharp edges, cracks, open joints. Everything should be more non-absorbent, cleanable. Again, the pool should be light colored except for contrasting markings. Things should just be clean and sanitary and in good repair. So it's just a general observation as you walk around, looking for any items that might pose a problem. And again, I want to just mention too, on the light colored pools, we've been getting requests for various different colors schemes, and our pool rules say light colored, but we do reference the Model Aquatic Health Code that has kind of a color gauge on the Munsell color chart for what light colored would constitute. But typically we're seeing, usually the white or light blue. I did get a call the other day for a royal blue because they're just not able to find pool paint. So I had them, told them to submit me some more information on it if they could find it. But just be cognizant of the light coloring if you do go out and see that a pool has been repainted and you have questions about how dark it may be. We can take a look at that and help you with that as well. So let's see. So pool ledges, seats, and slope changes marked. Again, that was back to the contrasting colors, slope changes. If there's a drastic slope change on the floor slope, which is determined during construction, that should have a marking that goes along the floor and up each sidewall. So that's what that means. If there's any ledges, like toe ledges or structural ledges in the pool, those have to be marked with a contrasting color. Again, benches marked on the edge. And again, another item to note, if there is a bench within a pool, it should be marked on the decking that there is a bench below. Typically the words bench below are on the deck itself or something to that effect. It needs to have some type of marking. So the next two, water level suitable for skimming, overflow, skimmers functioning. So the water level should be adequate to skim. So that should be halfway up the skimmer is where you should see the water level to provide adequate skimming. Obviously on an overflow system or gutter system, you're going to want that right up on the lip of the skimmer, or I'm sorry, the gutter itself, so that it's flowing over into the gutter system. And you should pop open the covers to those skimmers and take a look to make sure the basket's actually catching dirt, that there's not a lot of grit or dirt in there, that they're not being cleaned out. A lot of times you'll see a floating basket, and I'll get to that with some pictures as well. There can be a weir door on the skimmer, and if those are missing, those should be repaired. Otherwise, if there's not a weir door, they could be a floating basket, and you'll see that within the skimmer itself. It just floats up and acts as a weir on its own from the basket itself. And again, I have pictures I'll show you. Let's see. So the next section is pool water inlets comply. Those inlets are usually about a foot below the water level. If they are less than that, they should be adjusted to point downward, but you usually see them about a foot below. They're little eyeball adjustment. Sometimes you'll have floor inlets. So most times those have already been approved during construction for the number and location of those. So you just kind of look and make sure that you're not missing any of the covers to them. Sometimes you'll see ripples through the water near there to know that they're actually functioning, or you can put your hand down there and feel it. Sometimes you could have issues with your system, so you may not actually feel flow through there. That could be a problem, but just take a look as you walk around and make sure that the covers aren't missing. And then again, the main drains, most times you're going to see 2 floor main drains, and those should have the proper covers by now. They don't manufacture the covers any longer that are not VGBA approved. So those should all be in compliance. And with that though, those covers have a lifetime on them. Obviously you're not going to see that. It's marked on the cover itself, but it can range anywhere from 5 to maybe up to 10 years, depending on the make and model of that cover. But just take a look and see if you can see any visible cracks from the deck as you're looking at them. But for the most part, it can just be a reminder as you're talking with the operator, just to verify that they're aware of those main drain covers have a lifetime limit on them. Like I said, I just wanted to go through that with the words in front of you, and then we'll just do some pictures here. So you can see on this upper left picture, You can't even see that pole that's down there. It's murky water. So that would be a definite not approved for operation. You can't see the bottom of the pool. Again, you've got a green pool before and a clear pool after. If you have some issues like that, that's not clearing up. You're not wanting that type of water quality. As far as like I mentioned, any cracks or crevices, you don't want to see any large cracks in the deck like you would in this picture, or if you see in the pool shell itself, there's cracks. These can be items that you mark and note that would be repaired when, say, for example, the season is over. If it's an outdoor pool, when they drain the pool, they can make these repairs. One place or location that is the rules do spell out specifically is in this bottom right picture. You can see it's highlighted in red. It's the joint that's between the coping and the deck itself that needs to be sealed. So there should be some type of sealant within there so that you're not getting any dirt, debris, algae buildup, bacteria growth in that section. And this picture right here is just a profile view of that. You have the coping over here. That joint should have some type of sealant in it before the actual deck area. So as I mentioned about the skimmers or overflow, you can see in this top picture, you've got about halfway up the skimmer. That's where you should be seeing the water level. If it's below that, it doesn't skim properly. They're going to need to add water. If it's above that, they have too much water and should drain some that's not going to skim properly. And over here are various types of baskets and a basic picture of a skimmer. This one has a weir door. Those seem to always get broken. Kids like to play with those. So make sure that they're replaced if you do see one missing. And then over here is just a perimeter overflow or gutter system. So that water should be able to be up to that edge. And when any bather load is in the pool, then that volume just gets displaced and put into that gutter system. Again, here's what you should see through the inlets. You should make sure you see the actual cover, that these aren't broken or have chips or cracks in them, if you can see that. Otherwise, they should be repaired. Main drains come in all different shapes and sizes. You have the round, you have square, you have what you call the unblockable drains. So these long ones, sometimes with unblockables, they're large enough that you would only see one drain located in a pool. So if you do have just one square or one round, that should not be the case. Sometimes you may have a sidewall main drain as well. That is acceptable. And more recently, we've been accepting replacements on sidewalls for main drains in very old pools. It would take basically reconstructing the entire pool and trying to get down to those floor main drains to change them out if they're leaking. And it's just not feasible. So what they've done is fill those floor main drains in and place sidewall main drains. So that would be the only time that you would see the main drains solely on the sidewall. And you would be aware of those through a construction permit application. Any questions on that section?
Not so much that section, Karen, but we did have a few questions come in, and Dave and I tried to address them. There was one about any talks on updating the rules, and I put in there that yes, we're hopeful with being able to hire another engineer, that once that position is filled, we might have some capacity to start a stakeholder process and look at updating the rules, and we may also be forced into that with some pending legislation looking at swim up bars, but we'll not talk about that right now. And Phyllis had asked, can you speak on why you would see sand at the bottom of the pool? We have a lot of new inspectors.
That part I will get to when I get to the filter area, because there could be problems with the filter. So I'll speak more to that
Sure.
later on in that section.
Yep, and there was some discussion on upper limits and ranges for sanitizers, and I think that'll come up later as well.
Okay, yep, I can hit on that at that point in time too. Okay. The next section is safety. So the first part of that is lifeguards on duty. If a pool is owned by a government agency, a public corporation, or a school, or if the pool is greater than 2,400 square feet, or if the pool has a diving board, or if you have multiple pools within one enclosure that the area of those pools is greater than 2,400 square feet, that would warrant the requirement for a lifeguard. Lifeguards are required to be 1 per 75 people or bather load. There could be variances to that if they have a contingency plan and request a reduction in that. There is no variance for allowing a lifeguard. If you meet one of those specific criteria that requires you to have a lifeguard, there's no variance for that. I've been getting a lot of questions with that because there's a shortage on lifeguards. And so they've been asking on how to operate the pool without a lifeguard, but we have no variance if that pool is required to have a lifeguard. You have to have a lifeguard. So we've offered that they could reduce the bather load or share lifeguards, or they would have to open the pool when they have a lifeguard available. So those are some of the options that we've given them. They would need to post a sign, either no lifeguard on duty. If the pool is not lifeguarded, there should be a sign there posted. Otherwise, their lifeguard certifications the rules indicate that they should post it, but we found, like, for example, at a YMCA, those lifeguard certifications are kept in their office, which is fine as long as they're available. Bather load, so that should be signed and shown in the enclosure. And those bather loads are calculated during construction, and it's based on a formula that takes into the deck size and the pool area, and the pool area based on depth. So it'd be anything less than 5 feet has one formula. Anything greater than 5 feet in depth has a different formula. So that's all calculated at the time of construction. So that should not change ever. The only thing is the facility can have a lesser bather load if they so choose, which is fine, but they obviously can't go the other way. So they have to at least be based on that formula or less. That's how the bather load's calculated. During COVID, I had a lot of requests for recalculating the bather load, just to make sure, because of having half capacity, they wanted to make sure to have as many people as allowed that they could. But that's the basic formula for the calculation. Hazardous objects, food or drink. So in the pool enclosure, you can have food and beverages. And if you do, there should be a sign posted as far as making sure that there's no glass or breakables. There should be garbage receptacles for that. There should not be food prep in the pool enclosure. So you shouldn't have grills next to the pool where people are bringing raw food in. That has to be separately enclosed if you do have a food prep area. And also there is no food and drink in the pool currently, the way the rules are written. You can have food and drink on the deck, but once you are in the pool, the rules prohibit food and drink within the pool. Lifeline. So if there is a change in slope, a lifeline is needed. Or if there's a deep pool, say for example, it goes to 9 feet, the lifeline is required at the 5-foot depth. If there's no slope change. So at any slope change or at the 5-foot depth, if there's no slope change, that's where a lifeline is required. If you have a pool that goes to 5, or say, for example, right at the main drains, it might be 5.5 feet. That's just a point of depth. So it doesn't extend further to a deeper depth. We don't require a lifeline. Like most hotel pools are a single slope that may go from 3 to maybe 5.5 feet. There should be no lifeline needed in those types of pools. So safety equipment, a lot of questions on the first aid kit. The swimming pool rules actually indicate a quite lengthy first aid kit needed. Typically what I say, if they have the basic 24 unit first aid kit, that is sufficient. They do need a blood spill kit. They need a spine board that has 3 ties and a runner and a head immobilizer. And then they would need, not at a spa or a wade pool, but if at a swimming pool or activity type or other type of pool, they will need a rescue pool, and it may or may not have a shepherd's hook on it. They need a throw rope that's 1.5 times the pool width or 50 feet, whichever is less, with a buoy. And if the pool is guarded, has a lifeguard, they need to have some type of a communication system, whistle, a rescue tube, resuscitation masks, things like that. So those are some of the safety equipment that is noted. And if they have more than 1 pool in an enclosure, you only need 1 set of that equipment. And they sometimes will keep some of the items in a different location, which is fine as long as it's been approved to where that is located and it's easily accessible. For example, sometimes the first aid kit, a lot of the things just get taken out of it, so they're constantly trying to replace it. For example, at a hotel, they can keep that first aid kit at the front desk as long as somebody is there 24/7. And you can post a sign in the enclosure that says that the first aid kit's located at the front desk. That's perfectly fine. So you're wanting to make sure all that equipment is there and it is in good condition. So the last one is there's a telephone available. So they need some form of a phone or other suitable means of communication. That's what the rules actually indicate. So typically we have seen a landline phone. However, a landline phone's become more expensive. We've gotten a lot of calls on what can I do in place of it? Can I just throw my cell phone there? Nope, you can't throw your cell phone there. It's has to be something that's reliable and will always be there. Somebody can walk away with just an untethered type of phone. So we've seen different type of cell phones. However, they're actually made for emergency type situations like this. They're tethered, they're actually fully charged, they have AC power, so they always are assured charge. Those have to be approved, and they should be made sure that the actual cell phone carrier has good coverage in that area so that it's reliable. We've seen call boxes, things like that. So we have approved of other types of phones versus the actual landline phone. So the sign has to be posted as to how to dial out. For example, if you have to dial 9 and then 911, that should be noted so people are aware of how to dial out on a phone. The facility name and address should be noted just in case the 911 operator may have a different address. Hopefully they don't, that's been checked, but it should just be noted just in case. And any other clarification, or for example, if another location for the phone is approved, a sign should be placed that, you know, the phone is at the front desk, something like that. So just go through some pictures of everything that I just talked about. These, this is basically a generic pool rule sign. You can get them off Amazon. Pool companies have basic signs that cover all of the items that need to be signed. So this is just part of one that is a common one that you will see. As far as the lifeline, this second picture shows an example just with the floating buoys on them and how a lifeline should be connected to either to the sidewall or to the deck itself. Here's the spine board with a head immobilizer and 3 ties. This one has more ties, but it has to have at least 3. A basic first aid kit, blood spill kit, and again, you can have a pole with or without a shepherd's hook. You need the buoy, but you also remember need to have the throw rope as well. Again, here's some pictures of different phones. Here's a call box. Here's like this phone you just may pick up and it may just dial 911 only. Here's an actual call box with a phone in it. And this one actually is one of those that I mentioned is a cell phone, but it is tethered in there and it's always plugged in to be sure it is charged. Any questions on that section?
Yeah, Karen, we've got some clarifying questions. Richard was asking about the 2,400 square feet of pool surface and within a single enclosure, and whether that total would include spas, wade pools, and/or splash pads, spray pads that ordinarily would not need lifeguards. And this would be where there's also one traditional pool within that combined enclosure.
So a wade pool needs to be separated on its own. So I don't know. That has to. I know I've had some health departments come to me and say that they've seen some that aren't, but the rules require a wade pool to be enclosed separately. So as far as the main large enclosure, it contains all pools. So anything that is sized over 2,400 square feet would constitute needing a lifeguard. I'm not sure. I guess I don't know how to answer on the splash pad part. A lot of times those aren't actually enclosed. Some are. I don't know how that would be affected as far as square foot because it's not a depth of a pool. I don't know if Jeremy or Dave can weigh in on how we would look at the splash pads.
Yeah, I would say that the splash pad doesn't have a surface area, so we wouldn't, if that was included in a whole enclosure, there wouldn't be any addition to that, the total surface area. I think it's an interesting question though, that, these other types of pools like the spas, that wouldn't need a lifeguard if they were in the enclosure. And I think if you look at the rule, the rule that references the surface water, it says the total water surface area within the swimming pool enclosure is more than 2,400 square feet. So to me, that would include, a spa or any other type of pool. That it would just be an aggregate number. If it's over 2,400, then the lifeguard would be required.
And Trisha had a question. She has MSU in her jurisdiction, and many kids like to relocate the safety equipment to their apartments. Can the backboard poles be located in the pump room?
I think on these, when we have a lot of problems with that, that as long as that pump, I mean, if the pump room is locked, then it kind of creates an issue because then who has the key and how do they find it? So if there's another location that maybe has some oversight where they could locate it and there's a sign placed in the enclosure, that may be a good compromise, but I'm not sure to place it in a locked room if that's not going to be able to be approved just for the fact of not being able to get to that equipment. I don't know if Dave, you have something to add to that.
Yeah, it's such a common, it's a 50-50 thing, you know, if it's same with the first aid kits, you know, if they're out on the deck and they're accessible, then they're accessible and then they can be used when necessary. But if they're out on the deck, then they're susceptible to vandalism and being stolen, and so they're not accessible. So, you know, it's kind of a give and take situation, and I'd say case by case. As far as the spine board, I think there might be more flexibility there. I think any first responder is going to have their own spine board that they're going to use anyway. As far as like a rescue pole or a throw buoy, something like that, I think the need for that is going to be quite immediate. So I don't think you'd want to have that, you know, locked away in a room somewhere. That's the way I would look at it.
Okay, anything else here, Jeremy, that I missed?
No, nope. And Dave did add NSPF recommended ranges for chlorine and bromine. He added that to the chat. So 2 to 4 ppm for pools, 3 to 5 ppm for spas for chlorine, and then 4 to 6 ppm for bromine for both pools and spas. So thanks for adding that.
Okay. We'll move along as we still have a bunch to get to. So the next section is bathhouse. These are straightforward. Again, a lot of these are approved during construction, so it's more so just assuring that everything is in good repair, it's clean. You know, the fixtures are operable. If you've seen they've made some updates, if they've replaced what was existing, not a problem at all. If they gutted the entire bathhouse and reconfigured and maybe removed some of the fixtures, that's something we would want to be aware of, because the rules do have a chart as far as the bather load and number of fixtures that are required. There is a reduction allowed for certain facilities, such as condos, other, you know, hotels where you would have your own room and bathroom. So we do allow a reduction. However, we would still want to be aware of any modifications to these. But in general, you shouldn't see that, and you should just be looking for the cleanliness, good repair, the hot water and soap provided. You know, the rules indicate the water temp should be 90 to 110 at showers and sinks, and the soap and hot water provided at each. That's pretty much it for bathhouses. The next section talks about the mechanical equipment. So this has a lot of components to it and can be very daunting, especially if you're new to inspections. It's got a lot of piping, seems to be running every which way, so it can get confusing, especially on a large pool. But I'm going to break apart each one of these. So for example, this is a large equipment room. You can see these large filters. This is probably for a competition pool or a large YMCA pool or something. You've got large diameter piping, so it can seem overwhelming, but it really, if you break it down, it's very similar to a small hotel pool piping. You just can break it down and follow the piping. So basically this section is going to cover the guts of what you'll find in there: the piping, the valves, the filter pump, the filter, the heater, chemical feeders, flow meters. So this is just a very basic sketch or drawing of what the pump room or equipment room should contain. coming in from the skimmers and the main drains and just flowing through and back out to the returns. And I'm going to break apart each section one by one. So first off, what I'd like to especially tell new inspectors is start where your pump suction piping comes in. Look for where your skimmers and main drains are located or are coming in, your piping coming in. And all the piping should have arrows and be marked. It's required in the rules to do so. So you should be able to find the pump and look at the suction side of where these are coming into. So what you'll see with that is typically on the pump suction piping, it's usually larger on the pump suction side. There is separate piping for the skimmer and the main drain, and each of those should have its own valve. So sometimes you'll see individual skimmer piping. So you might see, for example, 3 lines coming in that are skimmers and each having a valve. That's okay. A lot of times that skimmer line ties all 3 of those skimmers into one line coming into the equipment room, and that's okay too, but there should be a valve on the skimmer line. And then again, with the main drain line, you should only have one line coming in for the main drain line, again with a valve. The rules indicate that there should be 80% of the flow rate through the skimmer and 20% through the main drain system. It's really hard to gauge, and I've had this question asked a lot of how do you know? Basically, it's on the valving, and usually you can tell. Let me show you this picture. So here's a picture. This one is the skimmer. This one, as noted, is the main drain. So it's coming in and then going to the pump. So this valve being parallel to the piping should be 100% open. So you're getting in this picture 100% coming from suction, pulling from both the main drain and the skimmers. So to do the 80-20, obviously turning that valve halfway would be 50%. So you're going to kind of gauge of where you want those valves located. And that's usually the operator. Hopefully the operator's knowledgeable. I know that can be laughable. Many times it's just somebody that's thrown into the job that has no idea of how to operate a pool. But usually that's just kind of the, I guess, rule of thumb of how to gauge where these valves should be. Again, just 50% is a half turn, and you can gauge from there, just adjusting it to have more from the skimmers versus the main drains. So then you get to the pump itself. So once you see those and follow the line that goes into the pump, that pump is basically the heart of the system. That's what's functioning and turning over that water in the required time frames. So there's different turnover rates for different types of pools. Swimming pools that were constructed after, I don't know, I think it says before 1971, pools had an 8-hour turnover rate, but I've actually seen some pools approved in the 80s that still showed an 8-hour turnover rate. So there might have been a time frame there where it overlapped. But newer pools are 6 hours. So there still are pools out there that are approved at an 8-hour turnover rate. Wade, spa, and slide pools are 1 hour. Splash pads a half hour. Sometimes we have different activity pools. Those are combination pools. We review those, and they can be anywhere from 2 to 4 hours depending on the type of pools. So that should be also noted in the design specs. You should be aware of that as well. And that's actually what determines then your flow rate. So sorry again, this is a terrible grainy picture, but this is a larger pump. Here's the strainer basket. You should have a replacement strainer on hand. On the right here are the basic pumps you should mostly see in pools that are smaller. And there's the strainer basket as well, and there should be a spare basket. Just some more examples of different types of pumps. There's Pentair, Stay Right, Jandy. Again, these are the larger pumps you'll see at YMCA's or competition pools. You'll see those are most times Aurora or another type of brand that are the large scale pumps. And that after that pump, there should be another valve. It's the flow rate control valve. The rules require that valve to be in place, and it needs to be located on the discharge side of the pump, close to the pump as possible. And that's kind of what helps set the flow rate. So the valves from the main drain and the skimmers dictate where that flow is being pulled from. And then this flow rate control valve dictates and gauges what the flow rate will be at, if that makes sense. Again, terrible grainy pictures, but here's a bunch of piping. Again, can be overwhelming, but if you look at the very bottom here, you've got the pipe coming into the pump and then back out. Here is that valve. So here's a close-up. That valve is on the discharge side of the pump. Moving on to the filter. So there are basically three kinds of filters that are mostly used: high rate sand, cartridge, and DE, diatomaceous earth. So sand and DE filters can operate either pump suction or pump pressure, and there's specific flow rates that are required per the rules for each specific type of filter. So for example, the high rate sand filter, this is your common one, a Triton. So within that, this is all filled with sand. So you have your water coming in, and this diffuser then basically sprinkles the water through the sand, and it infiltrates down to these baffles, and then the pump then pulls that through and back out. So that's how the water filters through. A lot of times, if you end up seeing sand that's located in the pool, that's at the returns, like if you know, it's not just in the center of the pool, you don't see dirt or sand in the center of the pool. At the bottom, you'll specifically see them directly near return outlets. That could mean that one of these baffles are broken and it's sucking sand out of your filter. So that's something to be aware of, and they would need to replace or repair the baffles in the filter. Cartridge filters. So this is a typical canister, and you'll see either one or multiple cartridges within that filter. So these just get pulled out and washed out. So you want to have a spare filter cartridge so that you can replace it and then clean and keep rotating. One thing I forgot to mention with a sand filter, you do have a backwash to clean it. So that has a discharge pipe that should be air gapped to a sump or standpipe in the equipment room. For these cartridge filters, they do not backwash. So there is no backwash piping that you'll see. They just remove the cartridge and clean that out when needed. And also the gauge on the top of these filters, some of them actually have pressure gauges. If you know the operating pressure of your system and you see a 10 PSI drop, that's time to backwash. But a lot of the newer filters actually have a gauge that shows when the filter needs to be backwashed. It's got a green or red area, so it's a very easier to determine when the backwash is needed on the sand filters. Again, here's a larger cartridge filter. It has multiple cartridges, same concept. The DE filters, they have like a powder in them. They need to be recharged with the DE. I actually have been seeing some of these being proposed more so now. It had been a long time since I've seen DE filters used, but I do have some of these. They are just kind of similar to a cartridge filter, but they need to have this powder recharge after being cleaned. Also, there's regenerative media that actually it has a bumping action to clean it, so that's a little bit different as well. It's kind of similar in not needing a backwash. It just kind of bumps out the particles and regenerates itself to use the media for filtering. Any questions on that at all on these sections before I move on to the next part of the equipment room?
There were a few questions here, Karen, but one was, would it be possible to get a copy of the pump room layout? And I think, yes, we were going to provide copies of the slides for everyone.
Yep.
And then some discussion, you know, I think this will come up later. Could you describe breakpoint chlorination and possibly some info on saltwater pools, water chemistry for saltwater pools? Question, do you need a spare cartridge?
I know you need a spare strainer. I thought possibly, but let me look in the rule real quick.
Okay, and while you're doing that, there's another question. How do I know if an old pool is approved at an 8-hour turnover if I don't have the original approval, or if it doesn't say? Can I get a copy from EGLE? I have some really old ones that seem to have never met 6-hour, but I don't know if they are approved for 8-hour. And yeah, I think in those cases you can certainly reach out to Dave, Karen, or us in general, and we can kind of see what information we can find. Obviously, we've got all the plans here at EGLE. It's just what format they might be in. Some are so old that they're in microfiche or another format, and may take us a while to dig into that and find them, but we can certainly help.
Yes, and the rules do require a spare cartridge. I just wanted to make sure, but it does say a spare cartridge is necessary. Cartridge or cartridges, depending on the type of filter. Okay, remind me if I don't touch on the breakpoint chlorination, but I will cover that hopefully later. But if I forget, please remind me. So, let's see, flow meter. So the flow meter, basically, this is kind of very important because, as I mentioned at the top, you should be reading what the flow of that is of the pool, and it should be in line with what is required for that pool. So it's good to know what that should be. The blue-white flow meters, well, I'll get into that in a second. Let me just get to what the rules indicate. So that flow meter range should be 50% to 150 of that operating range. So, you know, if you have a flow rate of minimum flow rate needing 38 GPM, you sure don't want a flow meter that starts at 50. You need that range to kind of hover into that area. And the location of that is basically manufacturer specified, but typically, for example, for a blue-white, it's 10 times the pipe diameter up and 5 times the pipe diameter downstream, just to assure that that flow meter is operating correctly. The rules require it to be located before or after the filter, but it is better to, especially if you're using a blue-white flow meter, to locate it after the filter, just so that you get some of that dirt and particles filtered out before it hits the flow meter, because it can clog that flow meter. So here's the two flow meters that I typically see. This on the top right is the blue-white. That is very common, and there's a small bobber within there. And many times it can get a piece of dirt, particle, whatever, debris, and it will then just weigh that bobber down and you won't get an accurate reading. These are very sensitive to that. Whereas I've been highly recommending this H2O Flovis flow meter. They're more expensive, but they don't get gunked up or clogged up like the blue whites do. I like them a lot. They have this dial to read the flow. I think it's worth it if you're looking at having continual maintenance on a flow meter or replacing it. In the long run, the added expense for this type of flow meter, to me, makes it worth it. And again, the Flovis doesn't have to be located in a special place, whereas the blue-white flow meters, they're very sensitive to turbulence. So for example, you wouldn't want this located here. It's at an elbow, so you're going to have, you know, turbulence coming up through that elbow, and this flow, the bobber could be bouncing around and you'll never really get an accurate read on that. So I do recommend the Flovis, especially if you have a facility that's chronically having problems every time you go there, the flow meter's not working. Maybe recommend this type of flow meter to them, and you would eliminate that hassle. So again, that's a terrible location for the blue white, but if you had the Flovis, you could place that there because it's not sensitive to those turbulent locations. The heater. So the rules indicate that if you have a heater for a pool, they're generally above 80 degrees. They need a bypass, which is typically so that if there's a repair needed on those heaters, you'll be able to actually still operate the pool if you want without having to close the pool. You can bypass your return line and still have a functioning pool while you're repairing the heater. Most times, we just have some basic, I guess, information in the pool rules that this indicates, but we rely on the building codes for heaters. It's really not in our jurisdiction. So mostly the mechanical codes will come and review the heaters to assure they're installed correctly, because some of them need to follow boiler code depending on the type of valving that it has. Some are exempt from the boiler code, but that's all up to the mechanical inspector. One of the things, though, that we do require is that a thermometer is placed before the heater, not after, before, just for the fact that that provides an accurate temperature of what water in the pool is. If the thermometer is after, sometimes I see them located both before and after. That actually is probably a much hotter temperature just coming from the heater. So it's not an accurate reflection of what the temperature in the pool is. So that's why we require one before. A lot of new heaters will have a digital readout on them. And with that, they do, not all, but some do monitor the temperature of the incoming water. And if that's the case, then that is acceptable. We don't need an additional thermometer prior, but you would have to just make sure that it is recording the incoming temperature and not actually the outgoing temperature. This is just a grainy picture. Sorry about that. I need to update pictures. Just an example of a heater. That what you'll see, you'll have the two pipes coming, you know, one coming in, one coming out. There could be a bypass maybe somewhere further in the piping. Chemical feeders, whether it is bromine or chlorine, the two common types of feeders that we see are erosion or pump type feeders, and we do see salt generators. So, for example, these are examples of erosion feeders. You'll see a column or long pipe or tube that gets filled with either granules or tablets. And you'll see one connection to the pressure side of the pump and then one connection that then goes to the return line, which should be after a heater so that it doesn't affect the equipment, because it can actually harm equipment. So you'll want to see that on the outlet or return line after all of the equipment. This is just an example of the liquid chlorine setup. Usually you'll see the controller for that, and you'll have a container with your liquid chlorine, a container with your acid, muriatic acid, and you'll see those lines coming up into the controller, monitoring what is needed, and then lines coming back and connecting into the return line. Again, you can see here's the heater, so it's after the heater because you don't want to affect your equipment. One thing to mention with these, a lot of times I'll see the acid and the chlorine right next to each other. These lines will be crisscrossing. You do not want that. If a pinhole leak or something with those lines rubbed together and they leaked onto each other, you can get a chlorine gas, which is very dangerous and can be deadly. So you want to make sure they have some separation. And typically this is how you want to see that plumbed in, where they're separated. And this is an example of the type of pump used for the liquid chlorine or acid. It's a peristaltic pump. Basically, it just has tubing that gets, this rotates around here and pushes the chlorine or acid through this type of tubing, and then just pushes it through the system. This is some examples of salt generators. You can have the entire, this is a chlorine, entire unit, which includes a brine tank. So it is just kind of set in as one unit with a controller that will monitor then the salt generation and chlorine generation from there. Otherwise, many times you'll see just this unit on the left, which is the salt cell itself. It'll be in the plumbing on the return line, and the actual pool will have to be hand fed the salt. So there's just a seeding process for an amount of salt based on the volume of the pool, that they would first basically seed the pool with the salt. And then as it runs through the system, this salt generator then separates that chlorine ion from the salt and then puts chlorine back into the pool. So a lot of times people say, oh, I have a salt pool, but actually it's a chlorine pool. It's just a different form of getting chlorine to your pool, but it is a chlorine pool. It is not a salt pool. If you talk about those salt pods that you see, that's a different type of salt. It's an Epsom salt. It's not this type of salt. This is what you see for a swimming pool. You still need to have a chlorine residual. Any questions on that at all? I'm just trying going through the chat here to see if there's anything else. I think maybe Dave covered everything. I don't know. We'll move on, and if there's still some questions, we'll look at that at the end.
Yeah, there's a question asking if we know how often feeders should be changed out.
I don't really think there's a prescribed time frame for feeders. Obviously, if it's just not functioning anymore, but there's no prescribed time frame.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we would rely on, manufacturers' recommended maintenance and replacement. And we don't, there's a question by Andre about what salt concentration is needed in a salt generating pool?
Typically to seed a pool, it's around 3,000 to 3,500 ppm that you'll see, like the salt being seeded. So that's typically where I've seen the numbers as a rule of thumb. Okay, I'll move on. So let's see. So a fill line, most times you'll see a fill line for new pools. It's typically always in the mechanical room, and it's usually on the discharge side of the pump before the return line. And it has to be sized, which we do during construction, to be able to fill the pool within a 24-hour period. And that's reviewed during construction. So when you go to inspect, you'll just basically be looking at where that fill line comes in, and if it has an approved backflow device. So backflow devices, these are examples of RPZs. That's when the line is hard plumbed into the return line. You need to have one of these in line to assure you don't have any backflow of potential chemicals back into the potable water system. These have to be tested. I believe it's every 3 years, and there are certified testers that have to inspect these. There should be a tag on them. So if you see that there's no tag, or if the tags expired, they would need to be tested. Older pools will have what you see here on the bottom left is a fill spout at poolside. That actually, I don't see those hardly ever anymore, but there are still some out there. So the air gap for that is basically from the end of the spout to the actual water level of the pool. So that's been an acceptable means. Otherwise, in the equipment room, you'll see the fill line with a standpipe that goes into the return or into the pool, or if it's a surge tank, it will go into that. There would be an air gap for that as well. You could see into the, if that's located in the equipment room as well. Anything else for questions before I get into just the general operation?
Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that breakpoint chlorination now, or.
Yeah, I can do that before I forget. So
Real quick, Karen, if I could just cut in, there was a question about calculating the flow rate for a gutter pool, because I had mentioned that you could calculate real quick the required flow rate for a skimmer pool just by multiplying 37.5 times the numbers of skimmers, and that will give you the minimum, because usually that's going to be under the hourly required flow rate unless you have a real deep pool. So that's going to govern to get that flow rate. For a gutter pool, you don't have that rule of thumb to multiply by, so you're going to actually need the volume of the pool. So you'd get the volume of the pool, divide that by 6 if it's 6-hour turnover, multiply that by the 60 minutes in an hour, and that will give you your minimum required flow rate. So just quickly wanted to cover that so I didn't have to type that all in.
Okay. As far as breakpoint, there's, basically formulas for that, but typically the rule of thumb, so what happens is if you have chloramines, which means that all your residual chlorine, if you walk into a pool enclosure, obviously in an indoor one, and you smell a huge wave of chlorine, that's actually not good. It means you have chloramines. So what that means is all the chlorine ions are already combined. So you have more combined chlorine, and it's giving you that smell of chlorine. But there's not enough residual usually, and so it's not doing its job. So when those get combined, one of the ways to break those bonds back apart and get you those chlorine ions to be free and give you that residual chlorine is to basically shock the pool. So you're going to measure what your combined chlorine is. Your test kits can give you a measurement of the combined chlorine, and basically that combined chlorine shouldn't exceed 0.3 parts per million. So if you get your measurement of your combined chlorine, it's usually 10 times that combined chlorine amount to break those bonds and allow you to get that chlorine ion back into the water chemistry to do its job correctly. So hopefully that answers the question. I don't know if there's more specifics with that, but that's the general gist of kind of breakpoint. There's nothing else right now. I'll move on to the general operation section. And with that, the test kits are the first item. So the facility should have their own test kit. You'll want to make sure you take a look at it. The reagents should actually be not expired. They have dates on them, so they should have good new reagents that they're using. And a lot of times I will ask the operator to take their own test just to make sure that you can see that they know how, and you can take your test alongside of them as well if you choose. But they should be able to easily do that. And so there's two types. We require a DPD test kit, but there's also an FAS DPD test kit. And with that, one of the FAS DPD test kit uses a powder and a liquid, and that actually starts off with a color from the powder, and then you're dropping in your liquid to make that column of water clear. So you're counting those drops, and it's a formula within your test kit to then correlate to what the chlorine residual is. And those test kits actually take out the guessing game of a shade of a color, where the other ones just rely on your liquid reagents, and it's a colorimetric block. And so you're actually needing to have proper lighting, proper background, making sure that your color block isn't clouded or dirty so that you can actually see the shade correctly. So it is more subjective because people can see shades differently. So it does, the rules just require that. So it is just a little bit more subjective, but it gives you a general basis of where that residual and or pH or whatever you're testing for should be. Qualified person, readily available. So we don't require a certified pool operator. I do know there's some counties now that are requiring that under their local code, which is awesome because we haven't been able to open our rules up to require that. But a qualified person just means somebody that understands the pool operation. They know how to backwash. They know what to do should there be an accident in the pool, when to close the pool, how to test the pool. And readily available means that they should be able to be at the pool within 15 minutes. Let's see. Okay, so in operation, permit fee paid. So basically they should have their license posted. You should be able to see that when you go to the pool. So hopefully with our new database, we can streamline that issuance of those operating permits more so they're issued sooner than more into the new year. But if they do not have one, or if you're not sure that they have an operating permit, you can also check with us before you go out. Contingency plan and water sampling. So again, the contingency plan, we have a basic one on our website that I give to a lot of pools. Some larger type facilities have their own contingency plan, and what that is basically the steps to take when anything in the pool happens. If they have glass break in the pool, what do they do? If somebody vomits in the pool, what do they do? If there's a fecal accident in the pool, what do they do? It just outlines all of the steps to take when any type of emergency happens. Again, water sampling, what we talked about in the upper portion of that form, are they taking the proper BAC-T samples, and are they filling out their operating permits and taking the water quality samples periodically? Those operation report forms actually are filled out daily. They should take multiple tests each day to determine what the chlorine residual is. And that should be noted on that form, and those forms then submitted to you, to the local health departments within the next month. I know there's many problems with these monthly operating reports. A lot of times facilities will just write 8 a.m. and draw a line down, and then write chlorine residual 2 and draw a line down. I always say that's an amazing operator if that can happen every day, because you're dealing with a chemical. Water is a chemical. You have chemicals in it. It's going to fluctuate. Some days you have higher bather loads. Some days you have no bather loads. So you're not going to have the same reading at every time of the day, every day. It just isn't going to happen. And so I make sure I emphasize to a pool operator that that's not a report card. If you show 0 and then you show, oh, I cranked up the chlorinator and now an hour later I have the proper residual, that's what you want to see. Just so that you're aware of that operator knowing how to deal with any issues with the pool and that they can operate the pool correctly. The last one is no modifications without a construction permit. If you go to inspect and you see that there's some changes to the pool and they're major changes, or construction that occurred with a bathhouse, or they redid their enclosure and it now includes a larger area, those are things that you want to bring to our attention, because it can affect a bather load. They could need a construction permit, or if you see differences in equipment, it could mean just an equipment change form. So those should just be noted and brought to our attention, and we can determine what direction we need to go in. So with that, we do have, this is the standard test kit. One of the common names is a Taylor. This is the colorimetric block I was talking about, that you have to determine what shade correlates to what your residual is. I get questions about using these test strips. The rules require a DPD test kit. So test strips are not an acceptable means to test the pool daily. You can use them if you want, just as a quick in-between check. That's perfectly fine, but a test strip does not qualify as an acceptable means to test the pool daily. I've also had questions on these photometric type testing kits. The cartridge inside that you use does use a DPD type cartridge, but there's probes, there's calibration needed. So we've offered to have this as a basically a test to be used alongside of the regular test kit to just see how it functions. Nobody's really taken up the time to do that. These are quite expensive, but they are a little tricky. Like I said, they have sensors, they need calibration, so you have to know how to operate them as well. So for the most part, this is the test kit you'll use and you'll see. With that, anything noted should be added in the comments section. Just let them know a timeline for repair, so they just don't let it go every year. So for example, this one says the flow meter needs to be repaired. that should have a deadline, you know, repair by the end of the week, repair in 3 days, something to that effect. And then at the end of your inspection, this is where you'll go back up and make sure you mark if it's approved for operation or conditional or it's not approved. Make sure that you do note that and have the operator sign the report. So if you have non-compliance items, review them with the operator, make sure they understand timelines. You can use the supplemental form if there's actually any other type of corrections for different dates that you want to note, and you can mark that easier on that supplemental form. Just make sure they understand the problem and why. Sometimes they don't realize it affects just the operation or it's a safety issue. And again, be specific for deadlines for correction. So in the inspection report, they should be submitted to EGLE in a couple weeks of completing that inspection. That way we're not getting bulk and trying to enter these, or now they can be uploaded in EDI. So we would like you to do that. There's no need to duplicate those. If you do upload them in EDI, you don't need to send them to us in any other form. And again, it ties to the operating permit. We need that inspection to issue the operating permit. And if the initial inspection requires a follow-up, submit that form as soon as you can. Usually we'd like it in 2 weeks. And that's how you guys get reimbursed on these inspections. So it helps to get them into us. And again, I mentioned we don't really review all of these inspections, especially if they're approved. So if there's continual or chronic problems, just let us know, or you can escalate them to a conditional if you feel the need to, or we can work with you on maybe the best direction for these chronic problems. And if there's any type of problems, you can always ask us, or if you have questions on any type of pool or any flow rate or any basic design specs of that pool, you can let us know. And if we have to go and escalate some type of enforcement, we can work with you on that. If it's just a pool operator that's unwilling to work with you, we can deal with it at that time. That's all I had.
Thanks, Karen.
Yep.
We've got a few additional questions trickling in here. Phyllis was asking about location for water testing. If you're having issues with a chemical monitoring equipment reader not matching the pool water, where should those water tests be taken?
I guess I'm not sure what you mean, back T, or what are we talking about?
I'm sure it's residual.
Oh.
Like if you have an automatic controller and it's not quite matching up with what the bathers are seeing in the pool versus what's being read in the equipment room.
I gotcha. Okay. So yeah, so it could be the probes. A lot of times those need to be cleaned frequently and periodically. So if they're not cleaning those, it could just, that controller could possibly not be reading the accurate residual in the pool. So it's very important for those probes to be cleaned. I would suggest that that's the first place to start with.
Okay, there was a question about retention time for monthly operating reports, and I know Maliha was working on some updates to the retention schedule with the Michigan State Department of Technology Management and Budget. So I did put a link to where those approved retention schedules are located for state and local government. The schedules are a little bit different for state government versus local government. So sometimes your individual county may have an approved schedule. If not, the general schedules will be listed on the website, as long as those county-specific schedules will also be listed there too. Some questions about Eddie. Will we be able to see licensing in Eddie, or should we just keep emailing? We're continuing to work on local health department inclusion in Eddie. We expect that there'll be an outreach here later this year for some stakeholder involvement in what health department users will want to see. But yes, we're expecting that local health departments will be able to get into Eddie and see all of the regulated customers within their specific jurisdictions. So for Tricia, that, you know, Ingham County, you'd be able to have a dashboard item with, you know, all the pools that we have records for in Ingham County, and then, you know, you'd be able to generate a list of those with licenses or those without, those that you've inspected, those that haven't, those type of things. So we're expecting that to occur, just not sure on the timing. Richard was asking whether you would mention anything about using closing orders.
I'm not sure what the exact question is on that, but when you're closing a pool, there's some in the rules, some specific reasons why you would close the pool. The largest one is obviously water quality or lack of residual, things like that. And you would just use that closing order and indicate the closure, and then you would have to come back and inspect to reopen. I'm not sure, Richard, if I covered what you wanted to know. If you have more specific questions, let me know.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, feel free to do so. Thank you all for joining today.
I did see a question on reopening after a pool enclosure. That same form can be used to reopen. There's no need for an additional form.
Yeah, and regarding the recording, we will find a way to share that. Most likely, yeah, we will have to post a link to the recording. It might be a little big to share via email or any other way. And Karen, Teresa was asking again about maximum chlorine and bromine levels.
Yeah, I think David mentioned that in the chat. Usually 10, because most times the test kit will not read above 10, and beyond 10 you'll get the similar types of eye, skin irritations. So 10 is usually what we see for both as a max. Well, I think that's it. It doesn't sound like there's any other questions, so